last night I was with a group of guys and we were talking about our weekends and stuff, and I was very excited and said, hey, I'm going to be interviewing you, and somebody had not heard of you. So I described you as a guy who got his start, or at least where I found him, explaining evolution in a way that made you like come alive. It made it so it wasn't just like, oh, survival of the fittest, but how are there various strategies and how does it met out? Now you're talking about innovation. And it seems to me that innovation is one of those things that it's like, what is there to say about it? People run into a problem, they solve the problem. That's innovation. How can you write an entire book going from being able to talk about the sophisticated aspects of evolution to this is what innovation is?
Well, partly it's the same thing as evolution. Evolution and innovation are, in a sense, just the same process. That is to say, the creation of improbably useful and detailed, complex structures out of the world with the use of energy. You know, that's what an organism does. It makes, you know, a heart and lungs and a brain out of food. But what do I do as an innovator? I mean, I'm not. What does somebody do as an innovator? They take a lump of metal and turn it into an iPhone. It's the same thing. They need energy to do it, but they end up with something that is non-random, functionally effective, complex, and highly improbable. Couldn't come about by accident, and it's the same process. So I genuinely see it as that's why I have a chapter in my book called Prehistoric Innovation, in which I talk about the invention of farming, which was probably a pretty unconscious process. It was probably a very, very gradual thing in various different parts of the world at the same time. When the climate settled down at the end of the Ice Age and became much more predictable, it became possible for one group of hunter-gatherers to sort of just gently nudge nature towards producing the crop of grains again next year, or the animals or whatever it was. And then I talk about the innovation of the dog 40,000 years ago, the domestication of the dog. Probably the dog took the initiative. It started hanging around human encampments. It wasn't something that somebody said, you know what, I'm going to try and train a wolf. It wasn't like that. It would have been a very gradual evolutionary process. And then I talk about the first stone tools, the sort of flowering of human ingenuity that happened sometime before 100,000 years ago in southern Africa, which gave us a much wider range of tools. What was going on there? Well, it was something to do with the density of the population living on seafood, which enabled them to have a division of labor, exchanging and specializing, and that led them to create specialized new tools and things like that. Again, it's not a conscious process. And so eventually in that chapter, I end up talking about the origin of life, when from the randomness at the bottom of the sea somewhere, some molecules got captured in these little pores with electrical currents across them. And that enabled them to somehow use that energy of the electrical currents to end up being a bit more ordered, a bit less disordered. And that gradually turned itself into what we now call life. So in a sense, life is just a technology, or technology is just a biological process.
There's something almost magical when you talk about electricity moving across either, oxygen and then turning into cells. You're talking about some level of organization. Does this give you this like tingly feeling, or is this something that you get excited thinking about? To me, it feels like the same way when to describe something on such a finite level, so small, is the same as describing the universe, right? Being able to see far off into space. So do you feel this sense of mysticism and awe when you think about electricity causing organization?
Absolutely. I mean, ever since I first got excited about evolution, about genetics, about all these aspects of science, it has never left me the thrill of imagining what science makes it possible to imagine, whether it's the unbelievable scale of the universe, the depth of geological time, the extraordinary insight that the secret of life is a digital linear code. I mean, I wrote a biography of Francis Crick, and he and James Watson, 28th of February 1953, suddenly, for the first time in history, saw something that had never been seen before and could never be unseen again. And that is that right at the heart of life was a digital linear system that copied itself. And that was the secret of life. It wasn't something to do with quantum physics or spiritual mumbo jumbo. It was this weird little thing that there is digital information there copying itself. Now, these kind of things are so thrilling. And I would say to any child, yes, art can be beautiful. Yes, literature can be beautiful. Yes, religious insights can be enjoyable. But there's nothing to compare with a true scientific insight. And far from taking the mystery and mysticism out of life, great science actually takes you deeper into greater mysteries. It actually increases the wonder at the heart of the world, I think.
In your role with deep diving into Watson and Crick and innovation and evolution, I would imagine you would have to be very, very comfortable with not understanding things as you get in there, because the deeper you go, the more complicated they become. And so in order to get somewhere deeper, you have to go further away from what you know. What do you think prepared you to be able to handle over and over and over again going into these difficult, complex places?
Well, there are certain difficult, complex places that I try to go into and I just can't handle it and I'm not capable. It's my brain isn't good enough or whatever. Most mathematical things of an extreme mathematical, and my brain isn't a very good mathematical brain. But in biology and in genetics in particular, I often find subjects to be dauntingly difficult. I really don't know what this paper is talking about. I don't know what this word means. I don't know what this concept is. I'm going to have to go back and read something else before I can tackle this paper. And then I go back and read something else and think, well, I don't understand this either. I've got to go even further back. But what reassures me that I can eventually comprehend this stuff, and there's a wonderful feeling when it does suddenly click, when I've been looking into the virology of the coronavirus a lot recently. And when it does finally dawn on me what a furin cleavage site really is, and why it's different from something else, what makes me confident that I can do that is probably the fact that I had a wonderful genetics tutor when I was at Oxford, who was himself a leading geneticist. And it was at the time when how genes were translated into proteins was still being worked out in detail. And he was right at the forefront of this. And he gave us an infectious excitement about the knowledge that was coming available. And he sort of said, look, this is what we think at the moment, but we might be wrong. And I found that so exciting, just to be told that, I had reached the frontier here. This wasn't a case where this stuff had been catalogued and agreed upon. This was the hypothesis at the moment. So I love that idea that the job of the scientist and the science writer is to take you to the edge and look over.
Thanks so much for watching this Vance Crowe Podcast short. If you're interested in learning how to get better at communication, everything from getting rid of those uhs and ums in your conversation to figuring out ways to be more engaging, how to listen better, how to react, and how to create those kind of conversations where people really open up to you, then I recommend signing up for the Articulate Ventures Network. The beta testers are in there now. They're telling me which classes work, which formats work. But in 2 weeks, I'm going to be opening it up to podcast listeners. So if you'd like to be on that list, send me an email to vance@vancecrowe.com and we'll get you on the list so you can join the network when we get it started in just 2 weeks. Thanks so much.